tells the story of Mrs. Annie Pearson, a loving housewife and mother. She tirelessly cares for her family, but they often overlook her hard work. Mrs. Pearson feels invisible and unappreciated. Her family, consisting of her husband George, daughter Doris and son Cyril, takes her for granted. They are so caught up in their own lives that they fail to recognize her value. This lack of appreciation deeply affects Mrs. Pearson's well-being. Mrs. Pearson's days are filled with endless chores and responsibilities. She cooks, cleans, and caters to her family's every need, but her efforts are rarely acknowledged. Her family members are often inconsiderate, leaving her to clean up after them and expecting her to always be at their beck and call. They are so accustomed to her selfless nature that they fail to see her as an individual with her own needs and desires. Enter Mrs. Fitzgerald, Mrs. Pearson's friend and neighbor, who possesses a knack for fortune-telling and a touch of the mystical. Mrs. Fitzgerald is a strong, independent woman who understands Mrs. Pearson's predicament. She devises a plan to teach the family a much-needed lesson. Mrs. Fitzgerald proposes a personality swap between her and Mrs. Pearson. Through a seemingly magical turn of events, Mrs. Pearson acquires Mrs. Fitzgerald's assertive and outspoken personality. With newfound confidence, she decides to turn the tables on her family. She no longer hesitates to express her needs and desires. She stands up for herself and demands the respect she deserves. The family, initially shocked by this sudden transformation, is forced to confront their behavior. The personality swap creates hilarious chaos in the Pearson household. Mrs. Pearson, now bold and fearless, refuses to be taken for granted. She shocks her family with her bluntness and carefree attitude, leaving them bewildered and off balance. She embraces her newfound freedom, pursuing her hobbies and interests without a second thought. The family, accustomed to their mother's submissiveness, is forced to step out of their comfort zones. They experience firsthand the challenges and responsibilities that Mrs. Pearson handles daily. George, Doris, and Cyril struggle to cope with the household chores and their mother's newfound assertiveness. They begin to realize the extent of her contributions and the value she brings to their lives. Mother's Day is a lighthearted yet thought-provoking play that highlights important themes. It emphasizes the need for recognition and appreciation for those who tirelessly care for their families. The play challenges traditional gender roles, showcasing the strength and capabilities of women like Mrs. Pearson and Mrs. Fitzgerald. The play underscores the significance of domestic labor, often dismissed as insignificant. It sheds light on the often overlooked value of mothers and their contributions to the well-being of their families. Through Mrs. Pearson's transformation, the play encourages viewers to recognize and appreciate the unsung heroes in their own lives. Mother's Day delivers a timeless message about respect, appreciation, and the importance of valuing those who selflessly dedicate their lives to their families.